Good afternoon and welcome to the LSE South Asia Centre. My name is Nilanjan Sarkar and I'm the Deputy Director here at the Centre. A very warm welcome to all of you, a very warm welcome to our speakers for this very interesting and very particular event that we are doing this afternoon as we mark only 2 days ago a year since the military takeover in Myanmar. And as we have seen in the last few days, the increasing and distressing acts by the military in Myanmar on its own people. But before I speak a bit more about this event and why we decided to go ahead with it at this particular point in time, I'd like to give a very warm welcome to our audience who are joining us from across the world, across time zones, I can see. And thank you very much for your support and for logging in at this time. We hope you're going to find this discussion interesting. This event is being conducted via Zoom and is being live streamed on YouTube. As you will see in the YouTube, the chat function is enabled. So if any of you in the audience would like to pose a question in the course of the event or towards the end as we get into the discussion, please do type out your questions in the chat box and I will read them out at the correct time. You're very welcome to pose the question to a particular speaker, in which case please do mention their name. You're also equally welcome to pose the question to the entire panel and I will ask it accordingly. In case you are the kinds who tweet, then please do tweet and tag us at SAsiaLSC. There are some other Twitter handles that are given in the details of the YouTube page where you're watching it at the moment, so you're welcome to tag them as well. Before I proceed further, I'd like to thank Prospect Burma, which is an educational charity that is based here in London, and we are doing this event in collaboration with them, and I'd like to say a big and warm thank you to all of them at Prospect Burma for their support and collaboration for this event. If this event was in normal times happening on site at LSE, then members of the audience at LSE events have the right to ask questions in public without revealing their identity. In keeping with that spirit, at least, when I ask questions to members of the panel and speakers this afternoon, I will not be reading out the names of those who are asking the questions. I know that the names are visible on YouTube, but at least we will remain close to the spirit of how we do things at LSE. You're welcome to ask as many questions as you want. It doesn't say anywhere that you will ask only one question. I am going to introduce the speakers very soon, but before that, I just wanted to spend a minute talking about the event, the background, and why we are doing it. As I mentioned at the beginning, the 1st of February has marked a year since the military takeover of power in Myanmar and the putting under house arrest of the democratically elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. And in recent weeks, a lot of the situation has become more extreme, more brutal, and it would not be incorrect to say that it has deteriorated for its own peoples. Yes, it was yesterday or the day before that the BBC reported that the situation in Myanmar at the moment at the ground level was such that it would not be incorrect to say that it was on the brink of what might be called a civil war. That is how critical the situation has become. And the courage and the resilience of the people of Myanmar who live in that country and put up with this at an everyday level is nothing that should either be underestimated or be forgotten at any point in time by any of us. Those of you who follow our events more generally would know that we do events regularly. We, that is the LSE South Asia Centre, we do events regularly on Myanmar. Last summer, we did an event called Military Myanmar, Fearing Freedom, which was just after the takeover. Last term in December, we did an event in collaboration with the Soswi Haacke LSE Southeast Asia Center called Critical Voices from Myanmar, with whom we do a lot of others. We've done a book event on everyday forms of justice in Myanmar. So we do events focused on Myanmar in relation to South Asia and Southeast Asia, because it is a country that is on the cusp of both regions, and we will continue to do so in future. So if you have any ideas about what kinds of events we may do, please do feel free to email me. You'll find my email. You just need to Google my name and you'll find it. What makes this afternoon's event so special for us, for all of us who are participating, and I hope sincerely for all of you who are listening, is that despite what I said just now about what is happening at the ground level in Myanmar, we hope that the event this afternoon, which focuses on education and the future of Myanmar, will bring some sense of ideas of possibilities as we look ahead. Education being one of the most important pillars of any society, and which has suffered immensely in recent years, not only because of the military coup, but also because of COVID, and it has suffered in many parts of the world. There have been additional issues. Teachers have not been paid their salaries. Students have not been able to go for their studies. So there has been a huge impact. And we thought, when I say we, I mean particularly Martin Smith and Prospect Burma, but we thought that it would be very interesting to have a discussion on what is in store for the future of Myanmar when we view it from the perspective of education and those involved in education who have always been the bedrock and the seedbed of ideas and everything else that comes with it. So there's a lot that we hope to discuss this afternoon. And once again, to the audience, please do feel free to ask questions. It is now my very pleasant duty to introduce the speakers of this afternoon's panel. The order in which I'm going to introduce the speakers is the order in which they will speak this afternoon. We have decided in advance that all speakers will make initial remarks for anywhere between 6, 8, 10 minutes, after which we will open it up for discussion and for questions and answers from all of you. And we hope that you're going to find a lot of things to think about as we go through the event over the next hour and a little more. Martin Smith is Senior Advisor to the Transnational Institute and author of Burma, Insurgency and the Politics of Ethnicity. Martin is an independent analyst and writes regularly on social and political affairs of Myanmar. And Martin has been crucial to the organization of this afternoon's event, for which I am personally, as well as on behalf of the LSE South Asia Center, very grateful. Khin Ohmar is a former 1988 generation student leader and founder of Progressive Voice, a Myanmar human rights research and advocacy organization. Sai Sam Kham is former executive director of Metta Development Foundation and currently a doctoral researcher at the International Institute of Social Studies at Erasmus University Rotterdam, where he's studying land politics, rural democratization, and regime change in Myanmar. Yin Min Toon is an academic researcher affiliated with the University of Manchester and has been engaged in educational development projects in Myanmar during the past decade, with a focus on interdisciplinary educational and environmental programs. Dr. Jürgen Haacke is Associate Professor in International Relations here at the London School of Economics and the author of Myanmar's Foreign Policy, Domestic Influences and International Implications. Welcome to all of you. I'm going to start with inviting Martin to speak first, and then Omar will speak. Okay, so Martin, please go first. You have about 8 to 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I trust you can hear me clearly. Okay, so after the military coup back in 1988, there was a popular saying, the generals will turn the universities back into kindergartens if that's what it takes to stay in power. At the time, these words seemed alarmist, but that is exactly what the generals appeared to try and do. institutes of higher education were repeatedly closed down over the following decade as another incarnation of military government became entrenched in power. Well, in similar respects, I don't think we should doubt that we are faced with a similar scale of challenges today, and it's the threat to education and the possibilities for change that we will seek to explore in this meeting. Each of the speakers will deal with different aspects of the crisis, and we hope it can lay the ground for fruitful discussion afterwards. We should have no illusions. Myanmar is currently one of the most conflict-divided countries in the world. To put the scene in context, I want to highlight just 4 areas that I believe summarize the scope of this crisis. The first is the role of the students and education more generally have played in the role in the vanguard of promoting educational change in the country. Generation Z are in many respects just the latest generation to have taken on this critical role. A similar protest took place back in 1962, 74, and most memorably in 1988, when the national landscape was also redefined by military repression and political revolt. On that occasion too, the sufferings were immense. But I think the important thing, hope was never lost. The importance of education was not forgotten. And it is in education that there remain many aspirations for better change today. There's a lot of evidence of state failure in Myanmar, and it is in the education sector that many of these challenges are most profound. This leads to my second point, just how serious the state of national breakdown has become since the coup. As humanitarian voices warned, the country is hit by the 3 Cs, the perfect storm of the 3 Cs, COVID, coup, and conflict. And in emergencies like this, education often takes second place, but it's vital that support for programs and young people don't come to an end. At Prospect Burma's founding back in 1989, we took the slogan which we gained from the students of keeping the flame of education alive. And I think this goal, although there has been a lot of progress in recent years in different ways, is just as valid today. The snapshot of figures is absolutely alarming, but they convey a picture, as we've just heard, of a country descending into civil war, where there are 2 rival governments, the SAC and the NUG, who claim to be legitimate. Over 1,500 civilians have been killed by the security service and around 10,000 arrested. A further 300,000 people, including 75,000 children, have been displaced, which brings the total number of IDPs and refugees close to 2 million. And over 100,000 teachers have been sacked for their support of the civil disobedience movement. And inevitably, the fallout from such a catastrophe is immense. Schools and universities have been closed, conflict and divisions have widened, and ever-growing numbers of young people are joining resistance movements, or they're moving abroad, looking for jobs and educational opportunities. It's a really tragic situation. And amidst COVID and coup, there are many young people who had no education for the last 2 years. So we have to question, how much longer can this continue? The third topic I wanted to raise then is the role of the state sector. And I think this in many ways is the most difficult. When looking at education, I think we need to look at it in 2 ways. There's firstly the state sector, and then secondly, there are the alternative systems, such as those in ethnic opposition areas, those supported by non-governmental organizations, international donors, and so on. And importantly, during the past decade, there had been a convergence between these 2 sectors. But we need to say that this was just an initial convergence. There was still a long way to go. And needless to say, the SAC coup has brought all these trends to an end. So I think in any discussion of education, we need to be very aware of the systemic failures that have built up during half a century of military misrule. This is not to doubt the good intentions of many teachers, but the issues are severe. And I just pick out a number of issues: the poor education budget, the lack of critical thinking, the lack of vocational education, the neglect completely of ethnic studies in such an ethnically diverse country, and endemic corruption, with many students having to pay fees, private fees for extra tuition to their teachers if they want to pass exams. And the important thing is these problems are both widespread and pernicious. It would be nice to say the NLD had made real progress on education while it was in office, but I think even party loyalists would say they should have done a lot more. With support from international donors, a national strategic education plan was introduced in 2016, but it was complex and disjointed, and progress was only made in limited areas, such as kindergarten provision. For these reasons, NLD leaders said they were going to promote education in their second term in office, and a new plan had been drawn up, I think, for launch in May. But as we know, the regime seized power on the 1st of February, and strikingly, the education programme was one of the first ones to be dropped. So the outcome is bleak. The state sector is essentially at an end for reform, and international aid on so many levels has been largely suspended. So these are complex events to summarise, but I think there's one dilemma from this we really need to take care of, because when the NLD was in office, they had to make a choice of whether they were going to work with the government for change or they were going to try and reform it. And after consideration, they tried on working through the government public sector system. And I think many democracy supporters think that this balance was wrong, and it was probably a mistake of historic proportions. And it's this mistake and this experience which many respects explains why so many in the people now are so angry and frustrated and determined. Hopes of reform have come to an end. The regime is offering no visions of better change except a very strange form of military nationalism. And the Tatmadaw has essentially torn up a transition process for ethnic peace and democratic reform, which they themselves had drawn up. So in communities across the countries, there's no longer any sense of trust. So finally, this leads to the fourth issue, the non-state sector, where many issues are underway. Broad approaches are essential. Different organizations, we can talk about this later, have strengthened online learning and stepped up programs for students abroad. There are also renewed programs in areas administered by ethnic opposition groups. And also there's a focus on educational support for refugees, IDPs, and those in most humanitarian need. Here, the international community is important, but the outlook's mixed. China is unwilling to accept refugees, but in Thailand, there are migrant networks which are long-standing, while the Indian state of Mizoram has been cooperative, and it's allowing refugee children to enter high schools up to 8th grade, I think. International solidarity amongst academics is important, and with Australian academics this week calling for the release of political prisoners, including their colleague Sean Turnell, who has nearly been in a jail for a year right now. How this will pan out in the months ahead is difficult to predict, but one important trend is how discussions are moving fast to new visions for educational change. Dialogue is taking place in diverse circles, often around pro-federal models. And the hope is that out of the present struggles, bleak though the situation is, agreement will be reached that can provide the basis for long-term peace building and national reform. It's presently a very dark hour, and the country faces a daunting array of challenges in the years ahead, from climate change to economic progress. And it is to do this, it's vital that it has a system of education which was fit for purpose in the 21st century. And again, Myanmar is falling behind its neighbours. Young people, though, have by no means given up. And the country, we should acknowledge, is presently the scene of one of the most dynamic struggles for democracy in the modern world. And for all these reasons, support for education has to be maintained and stepped up. Education is a long-term investment, but already the changes of the past decade have shown how much progress has been made by increased educational outreach and opportunity. And it's to be trusted that the present generation will one day be the first to enjoy meaningful democracy and peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was a very, very useful summary introduction. I'm sure you have more to say, even by way of a background context, but we'll come to that no doubt during the discussions. Before I invite the next speaker, could I just welcome all those who have just joined us, because I've just been seeing that more and more people have been joining in. It's now my very pleasant duty to invite Khin Ohmar. Omar is a former 1988 generation student leader and founder of Progressive Voice. a Myanmar human rights research and advocacy organization. Omar, please speak now. You have about 6 to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilanjan. Thank you so much for having me here. Martin has already given the broader scope of the education situation in Burma. Like Martin said, throughout Burma's history, successive military regimes have had an iron grip on the education sector throughout, all along. Simply, they knew well it has been the students who usually revolt against their oppression for freedom since 1962, when General Ne Win staged the coup and took over the country. So for the military, they look at the education from the eyes of how to suppress the intellect for their political power prolonging, rather than how to promote and advance it for the country's development. So that's a very, very simple, how the military has been doing. For generations, Myanmar education system served as a lab for the military dictators, an experiment for their political gain. And we have been a part of that experiment all along. In fact, it became a propaganda machine. I remember a so-called study of political science in which it was all about Ne Win's propaganda of Burmese way to socialism. I just hated it. Through this, they tried to brainwash us to be submissive to the system. This puppet education under the dictatorship was one of the main reasons we rose up in 1988. My first public talk joining the 88 movement on Rangoon University Arts and Science University campus was all about this dictator's manipulation of education for him to prolong his power. After the 88 democracy uprising was brutally cracked down, Than Shwe regime even closed the universities for like about total 6 years. That was like a loss of generation. In response to this, for the 88 generation, 88 generation, and younger generation activists that followed, education for us and for our younger generation became the focal to our movement. Education became heart of our movement on the border regions of Burma with China, India, Thailand, Bangladesh, in ethnic control liberated areas. So in the ethnic regions, when you look at the ethnic armed revolutionary organizations have been running parallel education systems for so long throughout their decades of revolution against the Burma chauvinist education that allowed the Burma majority children a place of privilege when came to the dominant language in Myanmar, for example. When the All Burma Student Democratic Front, the student army, one that was formed after we all fled across, into the ethnic control liberated areas, education was one of our priority. When the organization look for opportunities for members to study in the jungle or to go abroad or online study. When refugee camps were set up along the border in Thailand, for example, education was also a priority, even studying online, taking courses, for example. When these millions of migrant workers entered Thailand without documentation, and they became undocumented migrant workers, and those from the ABSDF and other 88 generation civil society actors and ethnic youth and women, they have established migrant schools and learning centers. And these programs continue today as we speak in different parts of Thailand, especially in the border regions where most of these migrant workers and their children reside. So not only for the adults, but also even for the children, there are schools set up on Thailand side. And there were also many informal education programs established by ethnic women and youth and activists from 88 generation in the name of what we call as capacity building. In 2000s, human rights education became a center of the struggle for democracy and ethnic equality along the border. There were also those who came from inside Burma, quietly traveling across the border to enroll in these programs. My organization, Network for Democracy and Development, set up a democratic leadership training center in the refugee camp and trained many young people on the human rights, like democratic leadership, constitution, etc., etc. And let's make a note that refugee women leaders and human rights activists from the border documented the human rights violations happening in the country under the iron fist of the previous regime, and even traveled to the United Nations human rights bodies to present those human rights problems without any UN agencies' support. After Burma opened up in 2014, there was also a nationwide movement for national education policy reform led by Network for National Education Reform, the NNER. First time in Burma's history that Burma majority and ethnic education groups joined hands in hands to produce a policy that embraces diversity and federal spirit of the country. The military severely cracked down on the movement, arrested and imprisoned large number of student leaders, and later these student leaders continue to be the main target of the military. But what was really said was that time that the National League for Democracy party did not back this movement. It was a big loss, and it was also a huge missed opportunity in a very critical time of the transition, where the military was also testing ground for them to reconsolidate their power in the form of what they call disciplined democracy. But again, education is the key weapon to topple the dictators that we have ingrained among us. So even though the military cracked down on this organized nationwide policy reform movement, widespread educational programs continue in the name of capacity building that carry out by many civil society organizations. Indigenous rights, women's rights, LGBTIQ rights, rights of the disabilities, land rights, and you can name all of these rights. These rights-based programs travel far across the country. And I think this has gone beyond the reach of the repressive apparatus of the military and of the Ministry of Home Affairs during the past decade of this Burma's opening. And these tireless efforts are reflected, I think, is in the Spring Revolution, as when the military tried to rob their votes, and then these empowered resilient communities across the country joined together, rejecting this military attempted coup. And I want to say that the military's coup at this point is not successful yet. They cannot take over the country because people are not, especially the young people, are not allowing them to take over. So I think this is very important for us to look into that. And also there are many parallel education programs that are already taking place online, such as like, Spring Revolution, Myanmar University, for example. So even the educators who joined the, like a civil disobedience movement, rejecting to work under the military, continue to educate the young people. So what I see, these parallel administrations and service provisions, education, provisions are all the greater, great prospect for the country to move forward as the young generation now set the collective vision for country to become a federal democracy. So I want to say that in spite of all of the dark side, there are a lot of hope and light and positive side is happening throughout the year, which I think is going to bring the light at the end of the tunnel for Burma, Myanmar to become a truly a free federal democracy. Thank you, Nilajan.
Thank you very much, Omar. We will continue this discussion, no doubt. Just a couple of things. One is when you said that you were, when you were studying political science, what level was it?
It was not as it's. It was one of the subjects that we have to study.
No, what I meant was at the undergraduate level or postgraduate level or school.
Oh, it goes all the way to the postgraduate too.
Right.
Yeah. It's a very a systematically set a propaganda machine for Ne Win's dictator.
Yeah, I was just trying to gauge the level, and I'll tell you why, because we at our center we host the Charles Wallace Burma Visiting Fellowship, and it's very interesting to see the CVs that we receive as part of applications. And I'll speak about that later during the discussion. Just one more thing, this is just for the benefit of all speakers. We have a number of people, more than 60 people watching at the moment, and not all of them are necessarily always very aware of abbreviations like NER and all. So when you're speaking, if you can just explain what the abbreviations are for the benefit of those who are not Burmese or, who may be interested in the subject in the region and the country, but may not be aware. That's just by way of general information. I'm now going to invite Sai Sam Kham, who is former executive director of Metta Development Foundation and currently a doctoral researcher at the International Institute of Social Sciences at Erasmus University Rotterdam, where he's studying land politics, rural democratization, and regime change in Myanmar. Sai Sam, please speak now. You have about 6 to 8 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and hello to friends from across the world who are participating in this forum. Thank you, Omar, for highlighting the struggle and the importance of providing education for the migrant workers, as well as for the internally displaced people and the ethnic minorities. Education, I think, in my view, for Myanmar, it's very problematic in many different ways. And I'm also a product of the system Martin and Omar just mentioned. I have an experience of the university closed for 3 years. So my education all along from basic to higher education is very much disrupted. And yeah, my background is a humanitarian workers and a rural development, community development practitioner. So I'm not an education expert by any means, but I would also like to discuss from my experience how I get engaged with different forms of education projects and programs. My experience is kind of like ranging from running programs such as early childhood care and development, public health education programs such as harm reduction works for the drug users and people living with HIV and AIDS, protection education on children and women in the displaced people camps and in the war zones, farmer field school, participatory action research. So basically, my experience is a lot on public education, adult education, non-formal education, or alternative education. What is interesting for me is how do we define education? What constitutes education? And then also, how are we going to use the current crises, as Martin mentioned, COVID, coup, conflict. For me, I would even like to add climate change, capitalism or extractivism, that I think for the context for Myanmar, it's very important, especially in the time of such, uprising or a revolution that we have never seen before. And I would like to say that with the revolution, what I'm seeing is a radical shift in Myanmar culture and also education thinking. And the debates about education have to move beyond mainstream education or higher education only, as Martin and Omar has very clearly highlighted and outlined. How can we ensure education for everyone, access to education in a time of crisis like conflict and coup and COVID? For those who are living in the internally displaced people camp, for example. And whenever we talk about education, we talk about shortage of infrastructure. For example, like in the ethnic minority area, where are the schools? Where are the teachers? Where are the teaching materials? But these are all important. These are still a very big problem. In the recent transition and the changes in Myanmar from 2010 to 2020, I would say I have seen quite a lot of development progress in the infrastructures. The schools are getting better and all that, but still we have a lot of challenges remain. But my view would be very radical when I look at the education system and access for education. Access for education does not limit only in the shortage of infrastructure. We still have other barriers that it's very important to look at. Martin and Omar has highlighted that, such as language, especially for the ethnic minority, because currently it's based on Myanmar language, but in the remote areas, in the ethnic minority areas, a lot of people are still struggling with that. And actually there are some experiments on mother tongue education. They have limited success, but nevertheless, they have some decades of experience. Actually, we can learn from them. And the second barrier that I see in education, we can argue about that, but I would like to pull that loose end so that we can ask questions and we can debate later, is the role of religion. As Omar also highlighted that, you know, what we are seeing a lot in the spectrum of political debates and problems in Myanmar is the role of religion, you know, in our everyday life, also in the religions, or in the education. I explained, Martin, the other day that in many parts of Myanmar, we have a Buddhist Buddha altar inside the classroom itself, and the children have to say prayers and all of that. It's okay in the Buddhist majority area, but it's quite problematic for non-Buddhist students. And my question would be secularizing of education. So it's more than saying Buddhist rituals and prayer in the classroom itself, but in the curriculum, you know, how are we going to check removing proselytizing of any form of religion? I think that would be very important aspect of looking at the education, especially in the time of revolution and in the time that we want to see changes. And also racism. Is there any part of the curriculum that has some, you know, implication about discrimination and racism? Apparently, a few years ago, we have some issues like that. And then also, Kaman or Rohingya Muslim are finding difficult to participate in education. They cannot get access to higher education, as well as in the refugee camps in Bangladesh, education is also prevented. Rohingyas are also prevented from getting education. I still have a lot of points, but I hope I can come in later. I mean, for the last point, I would like to make that there are certain policies and law that we have to challenge, which, you know, at a glance might have nothing to do with education. For example, citizenship. So when we talk about access to education, without addressing the problem of citizenship, without addressing the discriminatory 1982 citizenship law, you know, access to education for everyone in the country would remain a challenge. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sai Sam. You've brought up a number of several important points, but I was, before I invite the next speaker, I did want to say that in, I can't remember exactly when, but I think it was in September, at the end of September 2020, we had a panel discussion like this on racism in South Asia. And we had speakers from Myanmar, along with a number of other countries. And that was actually based on both racism based on ethnicity, as well as racism based literally on color of skin, fair skin, dark skin. You know, I mean, you know, racism has multiple registers when it is practiced. So unfortunately, but that's an important thing. But thank you also for raising the question of religion, which unfortunately is not something that is an issue only in Myanmar. It is true of other countries as well, but it is an issue in Myanmar as well. May I now invite Yin Min Toon, who is an academic researcher affiliated with the University of Manchester and has been engaged in education development projects in Myanmar during the past decade, with a focus on interdisciplinary education and environmental programs. Yin Min, please speak now. You have about 6 to 8 minutes.
Thank you. And then thank you for everybody joining online for this event. So hopefully from this, we can give some sort of information for you regarding about the current situation in Myanmar. So I want to start with a bit of my background. So like, you know, Omar, and then, you know, Cosine, I also got through the same like education system. So I was born and raised in Myanmar, and now over past 10 years, I have been involved in different roles with the different projects in the higher education sector. So during that period, not mostly I taught about the digital and information literature skills, critical thinking skills, and then statistics. So now I just want to move on the general overview of the education system till 2015. So basically, most people might not aware of the education system in Myanmar. So since the beginning, Myanmar schooling year is 10 years. So unlike majority of other countries, so most students join the university age 17, and then the education system is mostly like teacher-centered and very, very much exam-orientated. And then also like faculties at university, which means that like faculty of science and engineering will be University of Technology in Myanmar. So like instead of, they are also under the different ministries. And then also Omar briefly mentioned about the political science. Another thing is very, very interesting about in Myanmar, we don't have social science subject. It does not exist at all. So it is again, the military deliberately not to, give the civilian or youth to the power, because for them it is knowledge is power. So they're trying to cut, as much as that kind of intellectual skill so that they can be controlled, many years. So my next point is like more like Martin and also Omar already mentioned that, after the 88 national strike, military closed all of the university for the 5 or more than 5 years. And then during that period, they built new university on the outskirts of major cities to isolate the students. Again, that is a deliberate strategic plan. So again, one university reopened, the academic years was cut to 6 months to clear the backlog. So again, because a lot of like high schools are open fast, but state university as they close. So a lot of students are waiting for to join the university. So you imagine only one academic year for 6 months, students don't learn anything. That is including me, So that is, again, beginning of the popularity of the distance learning universities. So a lot of students join the distance learning instead of going to the far away to attend their on campus. Again, there's distance learners, especially for the art subject students, they attend 10 days intensive course before the exam period. So again, because of within short period of time, intensive 10 days, again, they not that much learn about the subject knowledge. So because of that, during the NAD government, the government trying to solve a lot of issues. And then one of them, it is the higher education and then national education strategic plan for the 2016-2021 plan. So with the aim to improve, like Omar and then Sai Sam already mentioned, inclusive for a lot of ethnic people, and then also the disadvantaged students, and then also adapt the student-centered approach. And then also they're providing the vocational training to the school leavers. And then also, as part of the education reform strategy, a lot of international organizations are collaborate with the Ministry of Education from their, a lot of capacity building trainings for the higher education. And then in December 2020, a draft version of 2021-2030 strategy plan was released. So the aim it is from the May, they start to, for their second time, they start to ready for the next, reform of the education. And then also during that NAD government, they also consolidate specialist university under the Ministry of Education. Otherwise, for the international donors and organizers, very, very difficult to work under the different university, under the different ministries. So it is try to consolidate all of the university under the Ministry of Education, and then also giving the autonomy to the individual university. And then for the Science and Arts University, they also gave the they call it one campus, two system approach. So that was introduced in 2018. So now move on a bit of my experience of working with students and staff for the past 10 years. So basically my passion about the Myanmar education, it is again, the same as Omar and Sai. It is based on my experience. So when I was, undergraduate, I never seen textbooks in my life. We only study, we call it a study book, very thin, about, I don't know, maximum 100 pages book, that's it. And then so that is because of that experience inspired me to do the digital library project. And then we set up at the 30 university across Myanmar. So through that experience, I'm aware of the extent of skills shortage at the university staff and students, especially the ICT skills, English language, and the critical thinking. So because I'm working very close with the students, so what I learned, it is from the student perspective, lessons are unengaging and disconnected from the real world, and that their degree credentials are not recognized internationally. So even though they have a bright and clever student, cannot go to their study second degree in abroad. So because of that, there is a less incentive for the student to invest time in their studies. You won't believe it or not, most students only study the night before their exams. They call it one subject, one night. So that is, they not want to invest a lot of their time in their subject. From the academics point of view, they are so busy trying to finish the course, teaching the course curriculum and course unit. And then also because of they also have to teach the day on campus students. When the exam finish, exam marking, and then after that move on teach the distant learners, and then also distant marking, for the exam marking for the distant learner exam papers. So basically, even though they want to do it, they don't have spare time to invest their professional development. Again, another system in Myanmar, it is those academics rotating different universities every 2 or 3 years. So it means that they never settle in one place. So for the last point, it is we have lots of issues, lots of problems, but looking forward, for the future, I think that ICT and English language skills are still an ongoing barrier. There is a need to strengthen these skills for staff and then also students. And then we also need to improve national digital infrastructure and then develop online learning platform, because the future is the technology. We need to invest those things. And then more importantly, we also need to increase research and the scholarship opportunities to empower the youth to drive the change for a better future and a better democracy country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yen Min. That was spoken very eloquently and very much from the heart. I'm going to ask a question which is born from complete ignorance on my part. What are study books?
What are the study books? Because this is it, because I cannot turn to the other side, but that is the little book. So okay. It could be sort of for example, climate change, supposedly, but they don't have the climate change subject, but at least about the hydrology. So in the hydrology, one page about might be participation and then evaporation cycle and then that kind of thing. So that instead of textbook, they use that study book.
Sure. I'm asking this also for the benefit of those in the audience who may not be aware of the system. Are you suggesting, and please correct me if I'm wrong, please don't stop yourself. Are you saying that, so you have these study books, let's just call them study books, which are summary versions of knowledge, and students study that and go to the exams and write that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they are marked on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what you're saying is students are then not trained at whichever level. I don't know which level you're talking about. Is this undergraduate or postgraduate or what? But whichever level, that they're not encouraged to, and therefore they don't learn the skills of reading from a variety of books and filtering and assimilating knowledge and then coming up with arguments themselves. What you're saying is that you have a ready-made set of knowledge principles between covers. You read it the night before the exam, and you know, if you're a God-fearing person, you take God's name and go into the exam hall and hope everything will be all right. So there are two questions that come out immediately from that. One is, when they're assessed by their teachers. So presumably the teachers are also fine with accepting this as an acceptable form of knowledge to be assessed in an exam. So this is one very logical outcome of what you're saying. The other is, it'll be very interesting to know, we can have a discussion about this later, what interest teachers may themselves have in the system. Who writes these study books? Yeah. Who sells them? Where does the revenue of it go? Right? And, you know, is it in the interests of teachers to keep producing these, you know, quick fix books, which students then read? And then this is a circular story, because then the students get to know through generations that, oh, if you read this and go and write it, then you'll get good marks. You know, because one of the problems with this, all systems of higher education in all countries of the world, is the tremendous capacity and tenacity of knowledge of this sort to pass from one student generation to another. It passes almost invisibly. You don't understand how the newcomers come to know these sorts of things, but they know, they inherit it. But that's that. The other very important and interesting point that you mentioned is the whole question of the transfer of teachers. From one place to another. Now, if you are employed by the government, then it's what you sign up to. When you take that, it's like being a civil servant. You know, you're going to get transferred from one department to another, and that brings with it its challenges. One of which is that teachers never feel invested enough to invest in institutions to such an extent that there will be a legacy, because they know there will never be a legacy, because 3-4 years down the line, they're going to be somewhere else. So you know, you're literally on the trot. But anyway, there you go. Lots of things to discuss. Yeah, but thank you very much. It was very, very interesting to hear from all of you. May I invite Dr. Jürgen Haacke to make some comments? Jürgen is Associate Professor in International Relations here at the London School of Economics and the author of Myanmar's Foreign Policy, Domestic Influences and International Implications. Jürgen.
Yes, thank you, Nilanjan, and thank you also to Martin for inviting me to this great panel. It's been a pleasure listening to all the speakers, and I have to point out at the very beginning that I'm, of course, no expert at all on matters of education, apart from perhaps being sort of an associate professor at the LSE, but I've no real knowledge worthy to speak of as regards Myanmar, despite me writing on Myanmar every once in a while and looking at its foreign relations and the way perhaps outsiders are interested in the country for various reasons. Having said that, I did once or twice do some capacity building of my own together with some others, but those were occasions far and few in between. So what I thought I might be able to do is to just ask some questions, and hopefully these will also be useful to the audience. So without addressing these questions to anyone necessarily in particular, although once you hear them, you may, of course, feel compelled to answer, I'd go with the following 6 questions, if I may. So first of all, I was wondering whether we could get a little bit more insight on the impact of the military coup or takeover in terms of, what happens to the primary school children, the people in the sort of, or the children in the secondary education, and in some ways, what are the kinds of ideas that are being put forward to deal with this problem? As one of you said, 100,000 teachers having effectively been sacked as a consequence of participating in the civil disobedience movement. As to what happened to those teachers really, and as to what are the ideas that are currently held by either the NUG or perhaps even by the SAC. We should probably also include them in some way to deal with this problem of education. That's my first sort of bunch of questions. The second really relates to some of the things that were articulated as regards the period after or from 2011 onwards. So the kind of Hussein, I suppose, administration, and then obviously also the NLD-led government. I wish to hear a little more as to what you think actually are the kind of success stories, if any, that were attained for education in this period from 2011, or as to whether any of those steps, any of the reform measures that might have been embraced are actually worthy of being preserved in the longer run as we move forward. Thirdly, and perhaps linked to the second set of questions, is the point some of you made about the NLD not really perhaps sufficiently sort of working on educational reforms as some student protesters would have wanted, etc. So I'm just curious as to what factors do we attribute the kind of failure of the NLD or its leadership to this kind of lack, perhaps of substantive reform, in the educational field. Fourthly, I think it might be useful also for the audience to hear a little bit about how education programs are now delivered in ethnic areas. So we heard about, obviously, a lot of rights-based programs having been available to a lot of those who found themselves along the border post-1988. But I'm wondering as to whether these programs actually still exist and what they entail at the current juncture. Fifthly, just out of curiosity, because obviously our focus is primarily, and rightly so, on ordinary citizens, and all those who are interested in changing, Burma, Myanmar for the better. I'm just interested in knowing as to what is the level of education that soldiers, ordinary soldiers, actually receive, and does the military itself do more for the people it has within its own ranks than it affords its own people, more broadly speaking? And finally, and this may be a question particularly obviously directed at Martin, because I think he set off or he started talking about this, is the role of international actors. I'm unclear a little bit as to how this significant predicament in which we find ourselves as regards education can be ameliorated. I mean, what are international actors, organizations really able to do to help those on the ground? And what are the the kind of opportunities that those people who want to learn and who want to basically pursue their intellectual journey, what kind of opportunities are we able to really provide them? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Martin, can we come to you at the end so that you can hear what the others have to say about the other questions and perhaps also comment on that, but to speak especially about what Jürgen said at the very end about you, because that is a question on top of my mind. And there are some questions coming in as well about what international organizations and people who are not from Myanmar, from Burma, from outside, what they can do alongside doing a variety of other things through their governments, but in the sector of education, what is it that they may be able to do? Shall we just go round and ask, let's just start with Jürgen's first question, the whole question of, because this also came up in some of the things I said earlier for the other three speakers. What is happening at the school level, primary school, secondary school, children's education, especially since 2021 February? Is there any kind of information that you have on what is actually happening at the ground level about this? Does anyone want to speak or not speak? In which case we'll ask Martin to speak.
Well, I can share what I know. Maybe Yin and CSI can also join me in this. So, of course, first is like you said in the beginning, COVID already disrupted before this military coup attempt on February 1, 2021. But since in the last year and now on, what we're seeing is there are areas where the military fiercely attacking, such as in the ethnic Karen and Karenni. It's been very, very challenging. They're targeting, the airstrikes, for example, but deliberately target churches and schools and clinics, So there are some schools in Karen area being already bombed and destroyed. Similar to the also situation in Karenni. But there are other areas, in spite of the COVID and the military attacks, there are educators who are actually providing informal, in a way, in the informal setting, providing educations to the children as much as they can, including, those upper region in Sakai and Magway and the heavy military attacks. There are also areas in the remote rural areas where including the Buddhist monks are providing the education. And as you know, in our country's history, Buddhist monks also play a key role in the education sector. So those kind of activities are ongoing. But if you really look at the whole country, of course, there's a huge disruption of the education already. Like I said, some of those teachers, educators, some of them are even going into those quietly into those very difficult areas to support their children in a very quiet way. And that is what is happening. But yeah, overall it's very challenging. But then, like I said, there are also a lot of these online education programs that people are taking, including at the university level. Yeah.
Sorry, Sai Sam, did you want to speak? You can I just say you're free to speak, respond to any of the questions, or you can respond to this one in particular, and we can go through all the questions. There are also questions coming in that I'm going to ask to all of you. Could I also at this point mention, apart from the fact that to invite the audience once again to ask questions, and a lot of you are asking questions, thank you very much. My colleague in the next office has actually very kindly in the chat box pasted the link to the Charles Wallace Burma Trust Fellowships at our center. Please do have a look at it. It's also available on our website, and it is for Burmese nationals, Burmese passport holders living in Myanmar. The fellowship is particularly for them. Sai Sam, please speak now.
Thank you very much. I think I'd like to address two questions. One is related to what is going on now. I would just like to say that, from my experience, we try to support education of the children in the displaced people camp along the Burma-China border and also in the northern Shan state. And what we found was the children from the camp does not have access to higher education. After they went through the insurgent control, I mean, we have to understand that in Myanmar, when we talk about the ethnic armed organization, they are the local authorities. They are providing education services. And at the peaceful time, they have an agreement with the government that, you know, their schools are being acknowledged as part of the state education system. They have their education officer, they have their head teachers and all that being acknowledged as part of the mainstream education system. But after the conflict in 2011, that was cut. So I was meeting with the Minister of Social Welfare, Rehabilitation, you know, both with the U Thein Sein administration as well as the NLD administration. And we keep advocating that these children should not be cut out of the system. They must have, you know, we need to find a way to bring them to get access to higher education, but that was never materialized. I don't really understand what is there. That is also one of my disappointment, I must say, with the NLD government. You know, when the NLD government take over in 2016, we are overjoyed. You know, we really think that we have the first civilian government we want, and then they would make radical changes. No, I mean, I understand that there are limitations, but Ministry of Education is fully under the control of the NLD administration. But, you know, these are the things that I think that, you know, I kind of like regretted that I didn't see. The second point I'd like to make is in all the Myanmar political changes, students are very important part of that, you know, starting from the, you know, kind of like what majority acknowledges, founding father of the country, General Aung San, while he's a university student, you know, they are doing all these, you know, envisioning a new Myanmar. Currently, the Gen Z, you know, the PDF, all of those leading the current Spring Revolution are also, you know, envisioning a new country. And I would say their political aspiration, their political movement, including demonstrating against the civil war, was being curtailed and controlled and repressed by the NLD government. So these are kind of like the I would say that, you know, could have been better, you know, we could do much better than that. But despite all of that, I must also say that in this ethnic control area, they try to establish their own education institution. So when we try to negotiate with the central government and it fails, what they do, they try to do whatever possible for themselves. So they try to establish liberal arts institution. They even have a law academy in the liberated area. So these are the things that we can learn from them. I think including also the nursing school, for example. So the practical things that is needed there that they try to do. And the second point I'd like to address is, I you know, correct me if I'm wrong, and you know, also kind of like a more teasing way of you know, answering that. When Jürgen said, I would like to ask this question to Martin, you know, like the sixth question, you know, there are problems and, you know, how can we address this? But why Martin, you know, Yin, me, Omar have practical experience, you know, these are the things that we need to address when we talk about funding allocation for education, you know, designing education support program in Myanmar. You have to talk to us, you know, you have to talk to the local people who have experience. You need to talk to the universities. And I think linked with that, I would just like to respond finally that, you know, we have seen a drastic, radical shift in consciousness in Myanmar, radical shift in culture in Myanmar. Young people are questioning about patriarchism and all of that, you know, we have never seen that before, right? So the new education for the new Myanmar cannot be the old way anymore. We need a radical change. But we also know that Myanmar is a very conservative country, you know, very traditional society. There are a lot of things that we need to challenge. When even during the NLD time, we try to do a few policy advocacy, for example, like drug policy advocacy, and policy advocacy for sex workers, for example, are being pushed back from the conservative sector. So it's very important to understand, I would even say like defeudalizing, when we are talking about decolonizing in the global education. In Myanmar, we really have to talk about this to remove, we need to learn the history, but, there is a huge part of stoking nationalism, talking about, glorifying feudal system in Myanmar. So these are the things that we really have to look into. And when I said decolonizing, it's not only talking about removing the vestige of British colonialism in Myanmar, but also to understand that there are processes of internal colonization in Myanmar. And when we talk about Burma Buddhist chauvinism, and which is reflected in our curriculum, and to talk about removing racism, we really have to look into that. My last point talk about in the future education is we really have to understand the link between Buddhism and I'm a Buddhist, but I'm also looking at that critically, because during the military government time, they have something called Ministry of Border Affairs. And they have a border area missionary, Buddhist missionaries. And what they did, they opened schools and they proselytized in the ethnic minority area. And at the same time, promoting military supremacy and Burma Buddhist chauvinism. And that we really have to understand that, look into our curriculum and remove all of that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Omar, I'm going to come to you. I know you want to say something, but I'm going to give a chance to Jürgen first to respond to what Sai Sam said about your last question in international aid. Were you saying that, or did you? Yeah, is that fine? Okay, that's fine. You don't have to. Okay, Omar, did you raised your hand? You wanted to say something, and then Yinmin, you have a chance to speak if you would like to. We have got quite a few questions, so I'd like to bring some questions out, but Martin is going to speak before that. Omar, please speak now.
Yeah, I just want to also say that I totally agree with what Sai already said, but just one very key point I want to add. I think the major shortfall or the failure of the NLD-led government is also continue to harbor and nurture this Burma Buddhist chauvinist project. And I think that includes the also not only I saw that also that including the education sector. For example, when the ethnic communities with their education systems were trying to sort of diverge and merge. And then from the government side is more of this centralized thinking and attitude where, the thinking is like that we will send you the teachers, whereas the ethnic teachers who have been well experienced doing this forever are treated as a second class, and they are not given the equal credits and all of that recognition. I think again it all speaks where everything kind of come to this moment, and you see how this Burma dominance culture and attitude within the NLD has also played a major role in this past 10 years, how things actually, gone into the wrong direction, I would say. Yeah, I just want to add that. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. That was important, because I think the whole question of Burma dominance, if that word can be used, is important to understand the dynamics of a lot of things that have happened since 2011. We have quite a few questions. I'm just going to ask Yinmin, would you like to say something at this point? You don't have to, but if you would like to.
Yeah, I think just very short. I totally, agree. Like Sai said, when NLD, government take power, everybody really excited and they're going to change and eradicate reform. I think it could be that. It could be because of the generation, because younger generation are more flexible and then know how to work. And then maybe because of those administrative people are more like, older generation, and then they will be, under the military for the many years. So it could be because of that, it could be, that way. My second point, it is like, as I also said, one is like, want to improve or reform the education sector or whichever things in Myanmar. I think another things I think mostly fail. It is like because of the one at the beginning, like 2011, 12, or 13, when external consultants are come and then look, like going to the higher education or whatever healthcare sector. And I think at the time, it is not fully, civil government. So those people are always say according to what a person, like say, oh, you have to say, like, we have 10 satellite dishes, or maybe, then they say exactly, and then those consultants never check. So, and then one next step, it is like going to build a project, a big project based on those information, but the ground information are totally flawed. And then so because of when they build a project, next step, and then when the project implement, everything is totally not fit, you know what I mean? Then that is another reason is the failing things. It is like since the beginning, the first stage is not people are saying openly or maybe not getting the right information at the beginning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yinmin. And we'll come back to some of the things. And I do also want to have a brief conversation about the whole question of digitization and online teaching, because that is the way of the future. But then that is also contingent upon a lot of other things. And I do want to also share with you the kind of challenges I face personally when I try to do something as straightforward as publicize and advertise the Charles Wallace Visiting Fellowship within Myanmar. But that's that. Martin.
Well, I'll go with the last question first, which was about the international aspects. I think one of the false assumptions, particularly in the West, is that the Westerners somehow know more. It's my experience that Chinese, Thai, Indian, Bangladesh officials know much more about what's going on in Myanmar than most foreigners in real detail on the ground. And I think what we've got to remember, there's been 70 plus years of civil war, which has meant that de facto huge areas of the country, all the borderlands, have really been under the control mostly of ethnic opposition groups, although there was periods when it was communists and also other groups as well. And of course, there's huge issues of security, economy, education, humanitarian emergency. And what I've always found in these situations is that there's a difference between the laissez-faire policies you'll find along the border, which allow things to function. We're seeing it on the Thai border at the moment, where Karen refugees can go into fairly established networks in Thailand, or on the Indian border, where the Mizos and Chins are related, people can go across the border, about 30,000 refugees. Other countries would have a lot of trouble with this flexibility. But in the case of the ASEAN neighbours and the Chinese Indian neighbours, there is actually the question of what does the central government command and what can the local authorities do? And it's this elasticity and depth of knowledge, and often personal relationships, which could be friendship, but it could be business, it could be other things, are long-standing. I've, for example, crossed from the China border into Myanmar, and to my surprise, they have two kinds of gateways. One are called provincial gateways, which are government to government, and the national gateways, which are government to government, and the other ones, which are into areas controlled by ethnic opposition groups, they call those provincial gateways. So all of these things can operate. I think more important in this international sense now, and we're not really talking about this today, but I think the model of the struggle of young people in Myanmar is causing issues. I'm not saying concern as yet in other countries. We've got Hong Kong, we've got Thailand, we've got Pakistan, we've got a lot of countries, Indonesia, where the military is sort of coming up in various ways, entrenching its control over aspects of government. And I think amongst young people, the educational dynamic and how people are protesting and how they're calling out for the civilianization of government. Also very important in Myanmar's case, the localization of government. People want local programs. They don't want to go through the national sectors. I think all of these are issues to watch as well. And one or two things that Jürgen asked, I'd also like to comment on, because these international relationships, let's say the military leaders, we're now seeing Cambodia and Hun Sen and the different countries getting themselves into complete confusion well, how do they deal with the military government? And that does raise the issue of privilege and representation and education. And what we're seeing in Myanmar at the moment is a complete collapse of education. Indeed, there are families who are moving away from towns because they don't want to register to go to government schools, which is pretty extraordinary. We have anomalies where the most conflict-driven part of the country 18 months ago was Rakhine State, Arakan, where the government, the military now have a tactical ceasefire. So to accommodate the people there, the schools are open. So we're seeing education being politicized. And I think we've seen this with the COVID-19 treatment. We've talked about the NLD, the Tatmadaw. One of the great failings of the central government is they try and politicize every issue, whether it's health, whether it's education, and that often undermines local capacity. So I think part of this new dialogue is local. Now, with education, we haven't mentioned private schools, which was a huge growing sector, very, very important. International academic relationships, these all come to an end. But for the military, we can be sure that the medical colleges are still running, which have very high standards. So these places are running, and indeed, the children of the generals, the elite families, their children will continue to go to abroad, particularly to places like Singapore, but it will be to other countries. So we're talking about a highly politicized atmosphere for education. And that does pull in the neighboring countries, because there's very good, Thai universities are showing support for academics in Myanmar. It's a very internationalized situation around the border, and it's built upon a long-standing laissez-faire, which has accelerated over the last decade to be more convergent with the political trends. This is no longer just borders. This is on a national level as well. And I just wanted to add one other point, because I have asked both same government people and NLD government people, why have you not moved faster on education? And they have similar answers. Education is very expensive, it's very complex, it's not a low-growing fruit. So it's a very difficult thing for the governments to get into. And then when the NLD came in, they had plans. So I was able to ask people involved in the strategy plan why they're not being implemented. They said, well, we have no budget. Most of the budget went on teachers' salaries. There was nothing for spreading of educational provision. And then you look at this teaching body, and I don't want to over-criticize teachers, but some of the leading educationists will tell you, well, we've got to first train our teachers. You start at a primary school under this system, and if you're successful, you go up to a high school and you get a higher salary. That is not a very productive system of working. It's very archaic. So even those people who have educational ideas, they can't wave a magic wand. And so what we're seeing now is this fragmentation, the disruption of local education, and people are going where they can to get it. And we can be pretty sure the military elite will continue to be okay. But the average military soldier, I don't think will have any particular advantages in this case.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm going to bring in some questions from the audience now. We have quite a few, but before that, a couple of questions that have just come in, which I can answer. One is the names of the speakers someone is asking. So they're all available if you click on the details on the YouTube page where it says details. Just click on it, it'll open a menu and all the names are there. You can also see everyone's names at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, of the picture screen. So for instance, at the moment you can see me and my name appears at the bottom left-hand corner. The second is someone has asked why we did not invite Dr. Lewin, who is the founder of Thinking Classrooms Foundation. And I just want to say that we had invited him, but he's unable to participate because he's traveling at the moment. Martin had in fact very kindly reached out to him, but he was unable to participate. But we completely agree that his contributions would also have been very, very important and vital to this conversation. But he was himself, Dr. Jürgen was unable to participate for various reasons. All right, questions. I'm going to read them out verbatim because I don't want to paraphrase them. So I'm going to bring together two questions that have been asked by the same person. What strategies are there for small education organizations to continue providing education programs to children in Myanmar without compromising the safety of children, teachers, as well as other stakeholders, presumably those who are investing in it financially or otherwise? The associated question is, from the same person, what are the risks of providing alternative education programs in Myanmar? Who wants to take that up? Anyone? Martin, go ahead. Anyone could just switch on their mic and start speaking.
I think the absolute multiplicity of ways one can help right now, unlike 88, the first thing is digital education, online education. Omar mentioned the Spring University. There are a lot of lecturers who are now teaching. I think they teach for free. They're giving up their time joining. Prospect Burma, we've certainly moved a lot of our language teaching and classes online, and I know other people have done it. There are a lot of institutes like Parami Institute, Child's Dream, and so on, who have long experience of working in these situations. And then, of course, the groups on the ground, like the Mon Education Committee, Karen Education Committee, Kachin Education Committee. There are many, many organizations doing this. And of course, a lot of it's down to individual effort. I think you've got to make the effort. And of course, COVID is helping nobody. This has been a very, very difficult time. In fact, the way we're meeting today is all part of this. We're having a webinar rather than meeting in person. So I think there are ways to do it, but I would also agree the person is right to mention risks. And I'd also say, for many years, I was with the Three Diseases Fund, which was working on HIV, malaria, and TB, and it was working in the country. So it wasn't simply working in the border regions. And we had a very simple way of working with challenging questions like that. Is a question of who you work with. It's not necessarily who you work through. Make sure you work with organizations. That can raise a lot of ethical questions. But once you work through organizations, you've got to be more careful. And I think in the present context, the important thing is to localize approaches. There's a lot of local need, and there are a lot of local people who have the capacity. I could take the example of Karen State, where there's a civil war is spreading and so on. But there's a lot of local capacity there, a lot of dreams and ambition about what people could do. So I think, yes, keep risks in mind, but there are these alternative avenues. I mean, in fact, maybe this is a discussion everybody needs to continue afterwards. We could think of ways of putting up sort of advertisements and links and so on, so people can get more ideas. But there's a lot going on. I think it's just reaching out.
Sure. Sai Sam, I'm going to ask you to speak because I know you've raised your hand. But I think one of the things that was on the mind of the person who was asking the question was also the risks for those who are receiving the education. So it's not just those who are participating in or something, but also those who are receiving. But Sai Sam, do you want to speak?
Thank you very much. I would like to address two things here. Related to the alternative education, thank you very much for asking this question. I mean, in terms of risk, it would be very much depend on what subject you are talking about. You know, that also included in my one of my question about what constitute education. You know, what are we talking about? Is it training for agroecological farming or things like that? So when I mentioned about my experience of working with the farmers in adult education, what we have done is called farmer field school. So basically it's talk about how can we improve yield by doing organic farming, you know, agroecological farming. But what we try to do is how we teach that. You know, so we brought in farmers from the villages. You know, they come together, they form groups, and then they elected group leaders, and then they also learn about how to do facilitation, how to facilitate a village meeting, and then they also facilitate classes. You know, so when they go back, they can spread this kind of knowledge to other people. So the pedagogy, not only the content, but the pedagogy itself, it's kind of like, you know, transformative and kind of like providing a leadership training. So it's very important how you perceive risk and how you try to mitigate risks. So there are a lot of things. At that time, I remember that we cannot even use the word school because it's not allowed. You can never use the word like leadership, you know. So that kind of thing. So analyze your risk and try to mitigate that in many different ways. I know that some of my friends are providing livelihood and, you know, that kind of farming education for the CDM people. So this is what they are currently doing now. Of course, they cannot openly say that this is a training for the CDM. So yeah, This is how people are trying to do that. And the second thing is, when I talk about providing education in the refugee camps or the internally displaced people camp, there are some friends who criticize me. They said, you are talking only about mainstream education. And that is right. There are friends who are doing like homeschooling, and there are many different ways of providing education. They are saying that you are just looking at the mainstream education. You just talk to the ministries and things like that. And in your program, there is no portion of alternative education. So these are the things that we really have to look into. And I would say there are people in Myanmar who have this experience and who are currently doing that kind of alternative education. The third point that I'd like to address is the inequality in the education. It also linked with the question raised by Jürgen. In Myanmar these days, I mean, what really annoyed me sometimes is people say the junta soldiers are very violent because their education level is very low and because they are poor. So you know that blaming poor people and for uneducated, this is very, very common, right? But this is also not very helpful at all. There is a class dynamic or dimension when we talk about education inequality that include the inequality between the military as kind of like a class in itself and the ordinary citizen. So when you ask me about what is the education level of the soldier, yes, many of them are quite low. But at the official level, they have their own university. They have Defense Services Academy. They also have Medicine University. They have Engineering Institute, exclusively for the military. So these are the things that we have to address. And the last point Martin talked about, that in the end, even when the country changed, probably their children might come back to Myanmar and making policies and still in the ruling elite. I would like to point it out, like the Uso thing is the previous minister in the U Thein Sein government. And when a Myanmar scholar got an international award, a very prestigious university, we are very glad. But later we found out that that is his daughter. I'm not belittling her effort and her intellect, but at the same time, you really see that there are that kind of structural inequalities. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Jürgen, did you want to come in to say anything at any point to any of this, especially in the context of the wide variety of questions that you had asked?
No. I think I'm obviously learning a lot, as we go along, and I think that's great. I do think it's very important, I think for our audience as well as me, obviously, to understand as to where in the future you have a sort of at least a basic, mainstream or other kind of alternative education that allows you ultimately to do those jobs that Myanmar's economy will in the long run obviously require. So I was very intrigued by some of the things that were said earlier in relation to engineering and technological subjects. But it seems also obviously that with these inbuilt structural inequalities, there are real issues. I mean, there seem to be so many issues, that I wouldn't know if myself where to start, trying to address them. And I hope that somebody at the end, will help us actually do that. Because it's a laundry list.
Thank you. Actually, one of the things that I think, it's sadly going to be impossible to discuss in this afternoon's event, but is definitely worthy of a lot of time and discussion, and has come out of today's discussion and some of the other questions I'm just going to pose to you, is the whole question of what is an actual gamut of activities within the education sector as expansively defined, because that was a point that Sai Sam made at the very beginning, is what are we referring to when we use a word like education? What types of education? But very briefly, I will come back. These are two things I have on my list. One is we should have a discussion about online education, because And it is important, and I want to stress this, that it is important not only in the context of Myanmar, but in the context of a lot of countries in this world, because it brings with it another very, very important element, which is the question of surveillance. Because online education can also be very, very easily overseen by authorities. Because you can, the internet is in that sense not a sovereign space. That's one. The other is a point that Sai Sam made in passing, but I think we need to dwell on it at least for a few minutes, is the whole question of professional training. And Jürgen just mentioned engineering and these sorts of scientific trainings, but I think it was Sai Sam who mentioned nursing. Someone mentioned nursing, but things like nursing and others, and education for sex workers, even education in public health and hygiene. These are all forms of education that are required. I'm going to take two more questions. Okay, this is on financing. Two questions from the same person. Sorry, I was wondering if NUG has been able to provide financial support to CDM teachers. Someone will have to expand on NUG and CDM. NUG has been able to provide financial support to CDM teachers and education administrators as they had promised before, or other than financial, if it is possible to share any other forms of support that NUG has been providing to CDM teachers and education administrators. Anyone who can answer that? Omar, do you want to go? Just go.
Yeah, that links to what I was also planning to respond to the previous questions as well. So I'll start with this question, responding to this question. As far as I learned, the NUG were able to support more in the first 6 months or so of the Spring Revolution to the CDM, not only the educators, but the other sectors. But I think later what I learned is it's been a bit challenging, but I learned recently that the NUG is actually coming back to be coming back to support more for the CDM, like to give more support. But saying that, the civil society side and the other sectors, including the local business communities, away from their military businesses, they are also doing their own way of supporting the CDMers as well, including the teachers and educators. So what I want to add on that is that these CDM teachers, and also with the other alternative means, they really need the support. It's because they are there, and they can just continue. But the support that they really need is not to maximum, but in the minimum level, they can still provide the education to the children, elementary, secondary, in their neighborhoods, and that in some areas that doesn't even require an online Zoom. You can just do it. But of course, there are a lot of challenges now. Of course, under the military, nobody is safe in Burma. But also because of the COVID, that's another added challenge that people have. But regardless, people really want to do, really try. So what I want to say here is, how do we reduce the potential or the already existing risk is by increasing the support to the people who are already, so determined to do the best that they can for the country, for the people, communities. If we can support or increase the support, you can actually reduce the risk. That's how I take it. And that's what I have been in our countries. I mean, in our organization's experience, that's what it has been. So that's one point that I want to make. The other point that I want to also stress here is the role of the international community. Burma is a country where the international actors can learn so much that they don't have to learn again in their next, future work. Is because there's so many dynamics, and just to give you one example of the coming back to the education, when the country opened up, those international communities or the INGOs operating in the refugee camps, they just pull out. Suddenly moving into the country and leave everything behind, where the refugee communities in the camps the refugee community leaders were left with nothing in their hand, that they had to revive and start all over again by themselves, you see? So my point here that I want to raise is that I think it's so important for the international community to really come to the term that it is this country is the people of the country are the one who will have to live, regardless of bad and good. So if they are determined to fight for the good, and this is for the international community, is to learn their support at the maximum, so that these people can really, the resilience can be strengthened to the point of the durable sustainability. I think that is the key point that have missed in the past by many of these international actors. So I think there's a big lesson also that if we can learn from that and move on with that lesson learned and lend the support to the people, I think that Myanmar from here on will have a better, greater chance of addressing all of these problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. I'm going to come back to you because there's a question on ethnic education, but I'll come back to you. Did anyone else want to speak about the financing bit? Martin, did you want to say something?
Can I?
Yes, please do. Please do.
I just felt like I talked too much. Sorry about that. I would just like to say that, the need on the ground and what the national unity government can do, it's very little. I must say that, there are a lot of complaints coming from the civil disobedience movement where the teachers, leave the job. Not only the teachers, nurses, doctors, all of that are trying to participate. So I would say that, it's very important for the national unity government as a legitimate government to provide support to them, but at the same time, you also understand the enormous challenge faced by the national unity government, to reach out to that places and where would the money come from and all of that, So they are trying their best, but yeah, it's very little. A few days ago, I talked to my colleagues trying to support education, healthcare, and emergency needs for the population being displaced in the eastern part of Myanmar, Kayah State, Karenni State. They are saying that over 50% of the assistance come from people-to-people support. So from Yangon to Molamyang to Myitkyina, all over the country, people are trying to help each other. I think I would say I'm very proud that Myanmar people are, in the end, we say that we still have each other and we are trying to help each other. I think that's a very important things that I see. And then they said about 20 to 30% of the aid come from some sort of international and local NGOs, but perhaps some of the UN and INGO assistance go through the local NGOs. And then they are saying that about 10% come from the national unity government. So that is a situation of one particular place. But I think there are still a lot of different parts in Myanmar for the national unity government to reach out. Yeah, I think that would be my response. Nilanjan also raised some question related to online learning and surveillance and all that.
Sai Sam, we'll come to that at the end.
Okay.
There are a few other things. There's just one thing. There's someone who's asked, Martin, this is partly for you and for me probably, is that several of us have a lot of ideas about what we can do in terms of following up. How should we continue this discussion and get in touch? So I am willing to stick my neck out and say that since you will find my name and email on the website very easily, please write to me directly, and then Martin and I can decide on how to proceed with those ideas. And Martin, would that be all right and acceptable to you? Yeah, that's fine. So please look for my name. It's n.sarkar@lse.ac.uk, and you literally just need to search my name on Google and write LSE and it'll come up. Yeah, there's one more question that I want to ask, and then Sai Sam, I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but we'll come back to it. Do you know of or expect any political challenges, even within the national unity government, when working towards ethnic education equality? For instance, through curriculum reform, language, access to other facilities, etc. So this is a question that is particularly focused on equality in ethnic education as opposed to the more general things we've talked about. Anyone wants to go with that?
I would like, yes. I see more hope for this in the NUG. The NUG education minister is also from I think it's from the ethnic Kachin, and there is this, this composition of the NUG is a very unique, I would say, in our country's history, because it's a comprised of the elected MPs, of course, mostly from the NLD, but then the others are from the different ethnic communities, civil society, the women, the young, so I think the composition really is unique and presents some of the opportunities that we never had before. But at the same time, there is this another political policy coalition coming up. They call the National Unity Consultative Council, which just held the first People Assembly that will actually also take the role of the a policy direction for the revolution. I think that when you look at that also, even though not as inclusive as we want to see, but they are on that path. And I think it's important to see these young generation, as I said in my presentation, the young generation setting up this federal democracy as a collective vision of the country is the first time present the largest opportunity for Burma to move forward. And that includes the education sector that embrace the diversity and ethnic diversity and the diversity as well. But I think it's something that, like for me, with my more than 30 years of the activist life, what tells me is you can never hope for something, you just have to keep working for it. I think this is the time that we are all working for it, regardless of our generations. Yeah. So I see the NUG at this point has presents the unique opportunity to to work on these historical grievances or the inequality from the past. But it doesn't mean that they will do it alone, and they cannot do it alone. I think it is for all of us to keep pushing. I think that's how I see it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yin-Min, you raised your hand briefly.
Yes, I just want to echo, what Omar said. I think the way, when I'm trying to explain the issue in Myanmar, I always give this analogy. It is like more like the issue in Myanmar is like a spider web. So because they are connecting to each other, and you have to think like a holistic way. And then when you're talking about the education, we talk about, higher education and then secondary and basic education. But actually, when we think about it, the parents are the main, the first teacher before you send your children to the school. So come with the parenting, education or parenting style in Myanmar. And then that kind of thing we also need to address. But for the moving forward, the future, like Omar said, NUG, the education minister is one from Kachin, and I also part of my job, it is also I travel a lot. I travel Kachin to Sittwe, and then Lasho to the near university. So when I work with those students from ethnics, nowadays those students from those areas, they are really clever and they are very bright. They really want to improve their their local area or their ethnic region, but they just need the right support and then the right education. But I think NUG will learn the lesson from the previous situation. I think in future, I think it will be better than previous generation, I think.
Great, thank you. I'm going to, these are the last two questions. They're actually connected. They're from different people, but they're both about the youth and goes back to what Omar also said about, belonging to different generations, but wanting to work towards the same objective. And then we'll come to the question of online education. I'm afraid we are way out of time, but I am going to finish doing this. One question is, Okay, let me read the second one first because I can't now find the first one. One is, can we revive the education system by the power of youths by introducing things like youth development programs? Should we focus more on non-formal forms of education as people practice civil disobedience, or move away from formal structures and etc.? So this is one question. The other question is, there are so many comments that I'm afraid I have to look through. Well, why don't we start on that and I look for the other question. Non-formal forms of education, could we look at all that? What is the view to empower the youth? Anyone?
If I may?
Yeah, please do.
Then
you, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, apparently I'm not a youth anymore, right? So we should have a youth in our panel actually, but yeah, let me try. I have experience working with some youth movements in Myanmar. Some of my friends, they just realized that, you know, there are a lot of youth initiatives among the Christians, but not much among the Buddhists. So they are not aware about development concepts and, you know, all of that. And you know, Myanmar is also isolated for so many years. So he has an idea to work with Buddhist youth in Myanmar. So that program expanded across Myanmar and thousands of youths have been part of it. And what we try to do through that is, again, we are using adult education. A lot of things that we did there are what we call transformative education or experiential based education. For example, young people will visit an ethnic minority village. They will just go and talk with them. You know, sometimes there are language difficulty. They will try to ask them to stay at their home and, you know, ask for food and that. And then they will reflect their experience, you know, that kind of things. And then they started to understand the struggle faced by the ethnic minorities and like that. And also the same is done with like the urban poor, you know, they would go talk with them, and that is sorely missing in Myanmar education, I must say. You know, these are very important. So when we talk about youth education, in my view, it's very important, you know, nowadays because of COVID and all that, we can do online learning and that, but I still think that it's very important to look at these different strata of the society, and young people need to understand that also. Yeah, thank you.
I found the other question, Martin, I'm going to come to you. I found the other question. The other question was actually about student unions. And you know, what about student unions and what is happening to them, etc. So that was the other part of the question. Martin, you, then someone.
Okay, I was just going to say on education, we have to not think of this as a complete hiatus coming to a brick wall. As we've heard from Yin, Omar and Sam, this is about a localization. This is about taking education further forward. So what we have to remember is that education programs are still continuing. Scholarships, studying abroad. The Myanmar academic community today is much more plugged in internationally. Many people have trained abroad in environment, human rights, society, social sciences, have gone back to the country. Many of the leaders of what are taking place are people who've had international exposure and training. This is still continuing. In fact, there are many students now stranded abroad, and we've got a lot of academics in this audience today from different institutions, and I'm hoping that they can find ways to also lend support so that this dialogue, these relationships continue, because, you know, with Prospect Burma, the condition for our students is always that they will return when circumstances allow. And many have gone back. So this is a continuing discussion. And I think one of the points I wanted to make was that to use an academic cliche, the military regime have no theory of change, except probably to take out the NLD. They just want to be the government and they want to get to their main rival. But actually in the opposition, although they don't have a clear theory of change, there's so much discussion about it. And I think what is very important is health and education will be the two subjects which can bring the country together. At the moment, it's so difficult to have even notions of dialogue, as we're seeing with the UN, who should they engage with? This is going to have to come at one day, but it doesn't mean everything stops in the meantime. Health and education, as we can see from the discussions with the NUG, with the ethnic education systems, with the civil society groups, this is ongoing. this is going to have to evolve into a theory of change. It's not there yet, but I think if the NUG and political transition is going to ever occur, this will have to be successful.
Thank you, Martin. In fact, I should add over here that for the Charles Wallace Burma Trust Fellowships, one of the conditions is that the fellows will return to the country when the situation conditions allow. The other thing is also, this goes back to something that Jürgen was talking about, and a lot of you also responded to, is that when we are, for instance, looking at applications from Myanmar, where the education system, even higher education system, as we've been hearing over the last almost 2 hours now, and we are sitting here, I am sitting here, and vetting and assessing and judging applications, one has to be very clear about how we look at those applications as being within the framework of that system, because we are not judging the applications. Let's say there's a Charles Wallace India Trust, and we are not judging it because the infrastructural facilities that are available to students at one level it cannot be compared as equal, when we're looking at it from this end. We are horribly short of time, but we have promised to have many discussion on online education, and Omar has no. Omar, would you like to say something on student unions if you want to?
Yeah, sure. Very quickly, I just want to say that the student unions, they have come back to be very really active in the last 10 years. Well, I think more so during the time of Thein Sein administration, but then somehow, again, NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi and the Aung San Suu Kyi leadership fell short of supporting the youth generation and the student unions. So somehow they had a hard time. Many of them were even in prison, But with the Spring Revolution, they all come back, and they are even the new chapters are being established in different parts of the country over the last 2 months' time. So I just want to say that, that includes all the way to the not only university to college, but also the high school and middle school kind of level. So I just want to say that there's a very active area of the youth. In fact, they are the one, if you look at the demonstrations taking place in different parts of the country for the past few months, every day are led by these youth and student union leaders. Yeah.
We have seen whatever little we get to see on the media, and sometimes with very disturbing images to follow. We have very little time, but I'm going to ask everyone to comment on the possibilities of online education as we look ahead and into the future. Online education, as we all know, provides the opportunity of being able to reach distances that we would otherwise physically find very, very difficult. I'll begin with Sai Sam, give a chance to everyone to speak, and then end with Martin, because Martin, it will also give you the opportunity to perhaps tell us how Prospect Burma has been dealing with a variety of those things. Also, if all of you could say even one thing about what kind of, if you had to pick and choose, I hate to put people in this position, but because we're short of time, in terms of professional education, what would you pick as something that would have practical, immediate, and a wide currency in Myanmar today? So 2 things. One is online education. The second is professional training. Yeah. Sai Sam, do you want to go first?
Thank you. I would just like to quickly touch upon the online education. Local organizations and NUGs are doing a lot of things on online education. I don't know the detail, but I remember something like Spring University, for example, and there are free courses. And what is very exciting for me is to see a lot of young people are now leading the revolution, including the armed revolution like the People Defense Forces. While they are fighting, at the same time they are also learning. So I'm very touched by that, and there are some opportunities there. And Nilanjan also raised the question about surveillance and all that. And of course, we talk about the role of Facebook in the Rohingya genocide and the racism and discrimination in Myanmar. So there is a big question about how a national government as well as international government or bodies try to regulate that kind of responsible digital platforms. The second point I'd like to touch related to online education is when we talk about equality, inclusion, and ethnic education, right? How does that link with the online education? I think there are some states and regions in Myanmar still, internet is still being shut down, not only by the current junta, but we have seen that during the NLD government time also. So how are we going to make sure this kind of things not going to happen in the future? That challenge will still remain. The last point related to online education, it's also broader, related to citizenship and how we see that, equality. For example, Kokang and Wa region use Chinese language, mainly. So I just would like to highlight the diversity. And what about the Rohingya? They use Burmese scripts. I know that there are some, some attempts to do some written language, but they are still struggling there, right? So how are we going to bring in such a minority group to have an equal opportunity in online education? I think for the professional, I would skip. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sai Sam. I think one of the things you raised, and actually Martin mentioned it in passing as well, was that the historical civilizational complexity, you see the very fact, the geographical facility of being able to access Myanmar from India by foot or China by foot, these are realities that inform the ground level realities and complexities at an everyday level. And these are also things that people need to know and learn about a lot of countries across the world and in the region. I mean, Central Europe is another very good example of how multiple, modern day countries are accessible very, very easily. Omar, did you want to say anything about digital education? Did you want to come in to say anything, or about professional training? Very briefly, please.
Well, I would just echo what Sai Sam already said. I think compared to our time in the jungle, now the young generation, when they are carrying with their with their determination to topple this military, there is a chance of studying more from online. And I think what we really need is from the international community to really come in and come up with this programs that really meet their needs, and that will be a huge contribution as these young people continue to set out for the future. Yeah, thanks.
Anything about professional training?
No, sorry, I didn't get, I don't think I caught that question. Sorry about that.
All I was saying was that, in terms of professional training, was that, if there was one thing that you had to pick about, what kind of professional training you would want to provide at the moment, what would you pick?
I think it's hard to say, because I think it's better to really hear from those there what is most needed. But I know, for example, the doctors are looking into what they can learn more in order to meet the needs of the people under the current circumstances, under this very challenging landscape, for example. So there are many of these areas that people are looking into. But again, I think it's better that they speak for themselves, because since I'm not the one, I don't want to be speaking for them. Yeah, thanks.
Sure, thank you very much. Yinmin, did you want to come in to say something about online teaching training?
Yeah, so in terms of the question, is that for the current situation or future, or maybe both?
It's current and immediate foreseeable future, not long-term future.
No, long-term future. So in terms of the online education, the youth in Myanmar, they are really good with using app. So as long as something create as a mobile app, they will be really good. So make sure if you're going to support education resources, have to be more, mobile customized. And then also the best, it is like you only need to add only 2 or 3 lines to create, for the mobile app. And then also it is like, I know if you want to do all inclusive for the different language, then you will be, like work different with the like language from the specialists, from the IT people, from the, different ethnic area. So again, like, I'm also still working with the youth from Myanmar. So at the moment, what the one they looking, it is the English language, but now, they want to study abroad, and then they more want to do like IISS, preparation course. But again, like IISS preparation course are very expensive. And then with the all of the crises, they don't have the extra money, or, their parents or the whole family are displaced in another area. So it would be great if you come up with the really good quality English resources. Not only the British Council is, some of them are free, but if you want to do IISS, you have to pay for it, so then if you're able to create an app for the Myanmar specifically, you can do it. But because I know I used to do it for the digital library project, I negotiate with a lot of people to get a free resource only for Myanmar. So if you really determine and want to do it, you can do it.
Great, thank you very much.
Another thing I want to add, it is from the professional training. So this is a good time in a way, like, because every cloud has a silver lining, so because this is a good time, it is like for the academics and the teachers who are doing the CDM, they have a little time, for their professional development. So it depends on that you can do the like subject, knowledge, because they also need the like in-depth their subject knowledge and also wider their subject knowledge. So if you're able to provide a basic subject knowledge for the academics, and then it will be good. And then also the professional continuous training for general practitioner, because in Myanmar, again, we don't have, unlike UK, like, in UK have that, even though to do a GB, you have the continuously sitting exams. And then in Myanmar, it's not like that. So like before, I know the NLD and then we also working with the like general practitioner, continuous professional development. I know there's academics mean like medical academics are also still providing online trainings to the student. But again, it would be great if you're able to provide professional trainings to the healthcare workers and then, the subject specialists.
Thank you very much. Jürgen, I'm going to give Martin the last word. Was there anything you'd want to say?
No, I just want to say that I sympathize deeply, obviously, with all those yearning to receive a better education or some education. And it seems to me from our discussion that obviously the struggle to reform education is going to be difficult and perhaps a long one as well. So maybe I should just say that, given that I'm the non-expert here, that I wish all those who are involved in this, the individuals, the groups, the organizations, both local, perhaps international as well, who are trying to do their best to allow for this learning to take place. I just wish them the best, and I hope their efforts pay off.
Jürgen, I'm happy to tell you I am the non-expert as well, so you're not alone in this party. Martin, you have the last word.
Okay. Yes, well, I think there's a lot to summarize. I found as the discussion went on, I really felt I was in Myanmar. I really felt we were getting into a lot of issues there. And it showed the breadth of problems, from the quality of education, the lifestyle of education, the role of education, to the politics and the conflicts. And we have to remember, we're having a discussion to the backdrop of COVID, conflict and coup. So these are terrible problems, but I actually think it's a bright light that we're even having this conversation, because it shows the direction of why change is needed in the country, why the desire is so strong. And as I said previously, I don't think we've come to a brick wall. I mean, I think for 10 years, there's been this optimism that there will be a way of transitional change which comes through engagement. And I think most people in the country wanted to continue it, but the SAC coup has stopped that. So we're now having the counter reaction that people are now saying, well, compromise is impossible. And it's allowing people actually to ask questions which were previously taboo, about the democratic system in the country, the role of the NLD and so on. So I think in many ways that this is a positive sign. What I would say, from the experience of Prospect Burma, because we were set up after the '88 event, so we've been following this a long time, and I think all international organizations can help where they can. There are many different ways to help. In our case, a lot of it has been scholarships. So many people have had scholarships, and we've always prized areas like environment, human rights, civil society, and human rights law, engineering, anything which is for the future of the country. And that issue, this need is graver today than it's ever been. One of the poorest countries, getting poorer, faced by some of the greatest climate change issues, environmental issues, land, natural resource issues. So starting at this point, everybody can look forward to areas where the education system has to be better. So that's one thing which can be done. And I think the other thing is that we have developed program areas, which I think are similar to most people, which are access to learning, access to leadership, and community, working in the community, change in the community. And I think what we've learned, and Sam and Omar, Yin have stressed this, that the new thing is to work with local partners. I mean, that has always happened. But I think one of the problems over the last 10 years is a raft of international agencies came in with good intentions, and they made the old trick of setting up multi-donor forums, funding INGOs, which then decided what they thought were policies, and they would just permeate them down and look for a local partner and give them money. Well, that way of working has to come to an end. This time, it's really, we're seeing what's happening on the ground. We know what the aspirations are, and I think we've got to try and be as supportive as we can, both in the short term and the long term. And I think, as a civil society leader said to me yesterday in preparation for this, they said, education has to be the basis for change. Without education, nothing will change this time.
Thank you very much. Would you have a beneficiary in Sai Sam? Prospect Burma has a beneficiary in Sai Sam. So there you do. This is QED. Omar, you raised your hand to say something. Please do, and then we'll wrap up. But before that, Martin, a couple of things in response to what you said. One is that, yes, I mean, as a rank outsider, as a complete outsider, while listening to this session, which has been I could only learn from this. I've always felt very seriously, and I don't want this to sound very goody-goody, but I've always felt that when you are confronted with this wide canvas of requirement, it can equally act as a catalyst to want to do something, because there are just so many opportunities. There's a sense in which you don't necessarily have to be picky or choosy, because there are so many ways in which one can get to the objective, to the destination in different ways. The other thing I wanted to say to you was about what you just ended with, which was what a civil servant said to you yesterday about education. At the cost of revealing my age, in the last century, when I was doing my PhD, my work is on religion, and one of the professors on my committee had said to me that, Nilanjan, there are only two things that can change the world. One is religion, but the other is education. So, Omar.
Thank you, Nilanjan.
You've switched yourself off.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the another opportunity. But I want to listening from Martin last word as well, is what I want to say is that this Spring Revolution really brought everybody together in our country in a way that never seen before. And it also presented the first time ever the greatest opportunity for the country to address the root causes and also to move forward in a brighter future. So the young generation sacrificing, including their life and their future plan and everything. And also people are really taking care of each other. And there is this increased solidarity and empathy towards humanity among the people. 4 years ago, when genocide against the Rohingya was committed by the military, it was a dark moment for our country. It's like we lost their humanity, you know. But now, in spite of all of these extreme violence the military is committing, there is growing solidarity and humanity. And that is the very reason this junta is failing with its coup attempt. So what I want to just last point emphasize is in the education throughout our these experiences, the informal education, also investing in the local communities, whether it is in the classroom or outside the classroom. I think one thing that we need to trust is the local wisdom, you know, the local experience and expertise and local wisdom. People know, for example, they know how risky to walk under these military attacks. But they also, because they know by their own life experience, they know also how to get around, you see? So that is the very reason that we need to really trust and invest in that local actors. And that's the way to move forward. And I just hope that, you know, with this, from this seminar and panel together, we hope also that those who listen to us will actually invest in the education, that Myanmar people, the young generation, are already sacrificing their current education and future for the future generation and the education of the future Myanmar. So I just want to say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to end by saying first that a complete and unedited version of the recording of this event will be available from tomorrow morning on our website in the events archive section. For those of you who have been asking, I mean, I wish I could show you where I'm sitting. I have 4 screens around me and the questions pouring in from all directions. And someone has just messaged me on my phone to ask about emails. So just to repeat, in case you hadn't heard, please get in touch with me and then we will take it forward. But at the moment, I am just not able to provide emails of all the speakers. I want to thank all our audience members who have sat through this, have constantly engaged with it, and it only shows not only the importance of what we've been discussing and no doubt the richness of what has been discussed, but also the interest and the invested interest that so many people have in education and the future of Myanmar. I want to thank Prospect Burma for collaborating with us on this event. I want to thank Martin for his interest in getting in touch with so many people and making this happen in the way that it has. And I want to thank all our speakers, to start with Martin Smith, Khin Ohmar, Sai Sam Kham, Yin Min Thun, and Jürgen Haacke. It's important that I say, given that I do these events regularly, that we will not be able to do these events if all of you do not give freely of your time, your ideas, and your intellect. You're all busy. And so thank you very much. This has been very, very useful. And no doubt we will have more discussions in the future. Goodbye.